That fire, they say, would die that night. The bullet aimed at Ibrahim Traoré would end the heartbeat of an entire continent. But Africa has never bowed to lead. At the first dawn of 2025, Ouagadougou trembles, not in defeat, but in resistance. The young captain who dared to dream of an Africa without chains still stands amid the flames, surviving and unyielding. Who sought to erase him from history? Who feared his voice so much that he summoned the angel of death? The answer lies deep in the ashes of power, gold, and betrayal, and tonight, that truth will rise. If you believe that the story of Africa's freedom must be told, stay. Like, comment, and subscribe, because what comes next is not just a story, but an apocalypse of our times. According to official sources, the assassination of President Ibrahim Traoré took place in the early hours of January 1, 2025, a time when the world was celebrating the new year. And Burkina Faso was engulfed in smoke and gunfire. An armed group attacked his convoy in Ouagadougou, while several army units simultaneously rioted in the suburbs. The government immediately launched an urgent investigation. But the fear of a coup spread faster than the loudspeakers. Thousands of people poured into the streets, carrying flags, chanting the names of survivors. However, beneath the chaos, something colder was at work, an invisible hand directing the bloody drama. And that is where the story really begins. As the dust and smoke cleared from Independence Avenue, it was said that Ouagadougou was no longer the Ouagadougou of yesterday. The city saw something history has rarely seen, a young leader, barely spared from death, emerging from the chaos. Empty-handed, without bodyguards, his eyes burning with faith. Ibrahim Traoré did not flee. He walked straight into the city center, where the night before, bullets had pierced the body of his car. To a crowd trembling with rumors and fear, he said only one short sentence. I am still here. And Africa is not dead. The words, echoed through the sirens and smoke, were like a knife cutting through the darkness. In that moment, it was no longer politics, it was the soul of a people awakened. The people began to cheer. Hands were raised, tears were shed, drums were pounding like thunder. Burkina Faso was no longer afraid. But behind the scenes of that rebirth, shadows were still moving. The government's secret report said, the attackers were not just local rebels. They were trained, armed, and guided by a network of foreign hands. Sound familiar? The classic formula of every coup in Africa since independence: Western weapons, Northern money, Southern blood. An anonymous senior officer said in the report. They didn't want to kill him for power, but for ideas. That's right, because Traoré was more than just a man. He was a living manifesto that Africa could stand on its own, be self-determined, be free. He nationalized gold mines, expelled the French army, and even challenged international organizations that treated Burkina Faso like a pawn. For them, that was an unforgivable sin. When Traoré spoke of an Africa that no longer owes a living, the Western world heard an Africa that no longer submits. And in that game, he had to be eliminated as soon as possible. On the night of December 31st, the lights went out in the presidential palace for a few seconds. Just a few seconds, but enough to change history. 3 explosions rang out to the west, the convoy set off in chaos, and a homemade mine exploded on the airport ramp. The driver was killed on the spot. Traoré was slightly wounded, but still escaped from the burning car. What was more frightening was not the shooters, but the one who opened the door from inside. A close member of the security forces had accidentally changed the route of travel just minutes before the attack. Was it an accident? Or was it a hand bribed with foreign gold? In the bunker after the explosion, Traoré said only one sentence to his loyal officers. If I die, let my people know that I did not bow. The words were later recorded in the diary of a guard who fell 3 days later while guarding the palace gates in the ensuing clash. The news of Traoré's survival spread faster than the rumors of his death. From Mali to Niger, from Bamako to N'Djamena, urgent messages circulated: he is alive. He has not fallen. On social media, people called him variously, the Fire of Ouagadougou, the Son of the Sahel, or the Oath Keeper of Sankara. Because in the hearts of many Africans, Traoré is more than just the president of Burkina Faso. He is the continuation of an unfinished dream, the dream of Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, men who were shot, betrayed, buried, but never forgotten. And now, as the 19th bullet fails to reach him, that belief explodes like thunder. You can kill a man, they say, but you cannot kill an idea. The West once thought Traoré was a passing phenomenon, a whim of the Sahel's youth. They were wrong. As Burkina Faso severed ties with Paris, closed French military bases, and moved toward internal cooperation with Mali, Niger, and Guinea, a new African order began to take shape. Self-reliance. United. And no more slaves. This makes someone far away very uncomfortable. Because if little Burkina Faso dares to stand up, who can stop Congo, Sudan, or Ghana from doing the same? Like a domino effect. Countries suffocated by debt and exploitation begin to see hope, and that is exactly what the great powers cannot afford to let happen. On January 2, 2025, as the sun rises, tens of thousands of people pour into Revolution Square. They carry Traoré's portrait, they sing the national anthem, they vow not to leave until they have seen him with their own eyes. And then, he appears. No uniform, no beret, just a shirt soaked in dried blood. He stands before the crowd, his voice hoarse. We were not born to bow our heads. If they want to kill me, they must kill this whole country. The cheers rise like a tsunami. From the top floors of buildings, red, yellow, green flags fluttered. In that moment, it was said, Burkina Faso ceased to be a nation, it became a collective oath. In the following days, the investigation revealed familiar names, businessmen linked to foreign gold mining corporations, officers who had trained in Europe, and an NGO that transported communications equipment to the Sahel region. Piece by piece, the picture that everyone had guessed but no one dared to say out loud. The assassination was not just aimed at a person, but at an independent will. And what frightened the mastermind most of all, Traoré was still alive. He not only survived, but also turned his wound into a symbol, turned his pain into a banner. If you are reading these lines and feel your heart heating up, it is no coincidence. It is the echo of freedom, finding its way back to every person who has been silenced. Leave your thoughts. Share if you believe that bullets cannot touch and awaken people. Because what is happening in Burkina Faso is not just the story of a small country, but a warning to the entire former colonial world. Freedom, once tasted, is never forgotten. And in that darkness, where the conspiracy has not ended, where the world still waits for a name to blame, another truth is being prepared to emerge. A truth that will overturn all assumptions, and change the way we understand this war. On the morning of January 5, 2025, a week after the assassination, the sky over Ouagadougou still smells of gunpowder. On the roof of the National Assembly, the Burkina Faso flag flies, tattered, but still bright red. Down in the square, thousands of people remained steadfast. They waited for one thing, Ibrahim Traoré's words. When he stepped out, there were no trumpets, no honor guard. Only the Sahel wind blew through the flags. But the look in his eyes was enough to make those standing there understand that a storm was about to break out. Burkina Faso, he began, has been attacked not only by guns, but by betrayal. There are those who, in the darkness, think they can buy our future. But I tell them, we are not for sale. A round of applause broke out, then died down, leaving an eerie silence. Traoré continued. We have seen empires withdraw but leave behind 1,000 invisible threads, in banks, in armies, in ideas. They wanted us poor so they could be rich. They wanted us dependent so they could be at peace. But not anymore. Not since that night. It was no longer a speech. It was a declaration of liberation. And behind the scenes, international cameras were recording, sending the news around the world, where Western embassies began to feel the unease spreading. That same day, Traoré signed 3 decrees. Suspending all gold mining contracts with foreign-invested companies, temporarily transferring management to the state. Recalling the French ambassador to clarify the shady connections related to the Coup group. Establishing the Sahel Union Council, including Mali, Niger, and Guinea, a military economic bloc independent of Western influence. The international media reacted immediately. Reuters called him a reckless leader. Le Monde wrote, Traoré is dragging Burkina Faso back into isolation. But in Africa, people called him by another name, the men who broke the chains. On January 6, a telegram arrived from Paris, Burkina Faso must refrain from actions that could have serious consequences in the region. The words were diplomatic, but contained a chilling message: if you do not bow your head, we will strangle you. A day later, Washington expressed deep concern about the human rights situation in Burkina Faso, a familiar phrase whenever an African country decides to stand on its own 2 feet. But this time, Traoré did not keep quiet. He answered directly at a press conference. We know who has built human rights as a prison. We will not be imprisoned by this hypocrisy. His voice was low, but firm. All cameras turned to him, and the world heard the roar of a young lion, no longer afraid of the shadow of empire, even though it still stood in the shadows. Immediately after his speech, the leaders of Mali, Niger, and Guinea sent messages of support. They called him the flag-bearer of the new Pan-African generation. A closed-door conference took place in Bamako. A joint declaration was issued. We will never hand over the soul of Africa to those who sold it. And so, in the midst of the crisis, a new alliance was born. Without UN recognition. Without Western advisors, only the will of the once divided nations. In Ouagadougou, the people were jubilant, but Traoré knew that joy would soon be tested. Because when he regained sovereignty, the old world would do everything to win him back. Amid the rising atmosphere, a shocking news appeared. Lieutenant Colonel L, who had been the security chief of the presidential palace, was arrested while trying to cross the border into Ivory Coast. Security forces found a hard drive containing encrypted communications with a defense contractor in Europe on his person. When questioned, he only said one sentence. You don't understand. I didn't betray. I just followed orders that were bigger than this country. That sentence spread across social media, making people angry. Orders that were bigger than this country. So who was the real owner of the bullets that night? In anger, tens of thousands of people poured into the streets. But this time, they didn't shout protest, but unity. They didn't demand revenge, but autonomy. On the walls, red-painted slogans appeared. No one can kill Burkina Faso. We are a nation of indomitable people. And in the middle of the square, a giant banner was unfurled. If they fear a man like Traoré, they will tremble before an awakened Africa. If you are reading this, stop for a second. Ask yourself, why does a small country in the middle of the desert make the whole world tremble? The answer lies not in gold. Not in oil, but in the will to freedom, something that no one can take away. If you believe that the voice of Burkina Faso is the voice of all oppressed peoples, share this article. Comment your thoughts, because every word you say is a small stone that contributes to the wall of freedom that Traoré is building. While everyone is celebrating the temporary victory, Traoré is still awake. He sits in a dark room, in front of an old wooden table. On the table was a photograph of a middle-aged man, a former officer, his teacher at the military academy, who had disappeared 2 weeks before the assassination. A loyal agent entered, putting down a thick file. We have evidence. It all started last year, when you refused to sign a new military contract with Europe. Since then, they have been infiltrating our ranks. Traoré closed his eyes. He knew that this war was not just taking place outside the borders, it was in the heart of the country. The enemy was not only wearing Western masks, but also hidden within his own ranks. Outside, the night wind blew through the empty streets. Burkina Faso was still awake, between two worlds, one that was collapsing, and one that was being formed. The people were trusting, the army was loyal, but Traoré knew the plot had not stopped. And in that room, in the dim yellow light, he wrote the first lines of the speech that would shake the continent. Liberty is not given. It must be won, over and over again, until no one has the power to take it away. And as the 10th dawned since the assassination broke over the Plaza de la Revolution, little did anyone know, a new conspiracy had begun to stir in the darkness. But this time, it did not come from beyond the borders, but from a man who had sworn to live and die by Traoré's side. In the days after the attack, Ouagadougou was no longer a capital, but a battlefield between two worlds, one that wanted to kill faith, and the other a people learning to stand up. The walls were still riddled with bullet holes, but on them was written, Traoré vit. Traoré lives. Foreign journalists called it, emotional reaction. But for the people of Burkina Faso, it was a declaration of survival. For when a nation has been betrayed so many times, survival is more than a miracle, it is an act of resistance. On the 5th day after the assassination, Traoré reappeared. Not on television, but in the middle of the Place de la Nation, the former heart of the French colony. He stepped out in his faded uniform, head held high. His voice hoarse but firm. They may shoot me in the body, but they will never kill the dream of Africa. The square fell silent. Then a thunderous shout erupted. Freedom or death. In that moment, no one thought of guns, or fear. For they had just witnessed what the world had once thought impossible, a man assassinated 18 times, still standing up to talk about tomorrow. In embassies, urgent reports were sent, Traoré is alive. Loyalist troops are retaking the city. Millions of people are gathered. Paris, Washington, and Brussels met behind closed doors. A question echoed in the halls of the European Union. If he survives, what does that mean for the rest of us? It's not just a political question. It's the ancient fear of the ruler, fear of the slave learning to look the master in the face. Because if Burkina Faso can rise up, who will be next? Mali. Niger. Congo. Traoré's survival doesn't just undermine the assassination plot, it cracks the entire global order built on slavery and precious metals. At his first press conference after the attack, a journalist asked him, "Are you afraid, Mr. President?" Traoré paused for a few seconds, then said slowly, "Yes. But what I fear most is the day our children forget that their ancestors were once chained." The phrase spread across social media, becoming a continent-wide message. In Dakar, students wrote it on university walls. In Bamako, it was sung on the radio. In Accra, children read it in history class. And in Paris, politicians discussed the danger of spreading neo-autonomism. Leaked documents revealed that the plot to assassinate Traoré was backed by a group of foreign military advisors. The goal was not simply to remove him, but to re-establish the old system of power, to return Burkina Faso to its orbit of dependence. But the plan failed because a young officer in the Coup group betrayed orders, rescued Traoré, and made all the evidence public. The officer's name was not released, but people called him the Son of the Sun. One day, he disappeared, no one knew if he was alive or dead. And from then on, his image became a symbol of the anonymous people who kept Africa alive. Traoré called an emergency assembly. He spoke briefly, each word like fire. "If my death was the price of independence, I have paid it 18 times over. Now it is time to pay the final debt to the fatherland." The assembly unanimously agreed, nationalize all foreign assets in the gold sector, and expel all Western military contractors. The world was outraged. Major news agencies called it political suicide. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, hundreds of thousands chanted, "No freedom comes from the barrel of a foreign gun. A people suffocated for centuries, now chooses how to breathe. But light always has a price." When Burkina Faso announced the creation of an axis of Sahel independence with Mali and Niger, the international financial system froze national assets, aid shipments were cut off, and a flood of fake news stories about internal strife spread. Western media said, Traoré is dividing Africa. But people knew, he was mending what they had torn apart. In a rare speech, he said, "Freedom is never given. It is won, blood by blood, voice by voice, generation by generation." And at the end of that speech, he looked straight into the camera. "If you hear this voice, wherever you are, speak up. Because silence is complicity." This was a soft CTA, but a profound one. It didn't ask for likes or shares, it asked for participation, participation with faith. A week later, the UN Security Council met in emergency session. A small country threatened with a full embargo. But when the representative of Burkina Faso stepped up to the podium, the world fell silent. He said, "They call me a rebel. But if rebellion means refusing to be a slave, then yes. I rebel." The words shook the room. And for the first time, an African leader was seen speaking without bowing his head. Soon after the speech, clips went viral. An unprecedented wave of support spread from Accra to Johannesburg. From Bamako to African communities in Paris and New York. Millions of people wrote the same hashtag. Hashtag Africa will not kneel. A strange thing happened. Everywhere, Africans began to talk about Traoré as if he were talking about themselves. It was no longer the story of a president. It was the symbol of a generation that did not wait for a miracle from outside, but wrote its own destiny. A girl in Lagos wrote, "I have never set foot in Burkina Faso. But today I feel like my country is also rising up. If Traoré survived 18 assassination attempts, I can survive this poverty," said a young man in Kinshasa. That was the real miracle, not a missed bullet, but a spirit rising in millions of hearts. As night fell over Ouagadougou, the sky was lit by thousands of torches. Traoré stepped out, holding up his bandaged hand. "We survived," he said. "But surviving is not enough. We must win." And in that moment, all boundaries between leader and people dissolved. He was no longer a president, but the keeper of the flame for a continent reborn. Collision. If you believe that the flame belongs not just to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa, leave your comments. Share this story so the world knows, Africa has woken up. At dawn, Ouagadougou was lit up again. Not by the palace, but by the torches of millions of people. From rooftops, from alleys, from calloused hands, the fire spread like the blood of a reborn people. Traoré stepped onto the podium, said nothing for a moment. He looked down at the sea of people, faces with wounds, with aspirations, with the silence of generations. Then he spoke, deep and firm. "We no longer ask permission to be free. We are free." The words exploded like thunder. The cry of "Vive l'Afrique libre" rolled like waves. No one was an audience anymore, everyone was a witness to the moment when Africa rewrote its own destiny. As the sky grew lighter, one saw on the walls, someone had written in charcoal. They wanted to kill one man, but they awakened millions of souls. Fire if the spirit touches your heart. Please like, comment and subscribe to the channel, not only to spread this story, but to keep the flame alive together. Because freedom does not belong to the strong. It belongs to those who never bow down.